You can talk back, that's all right. I'm Tre'vell Anderson. I apologize to the people in the front. This wasn't as short when I put it on. I'm the director of culture and entertainment at Out Magazine, which for those of you who don't know is one of the largest LGBTQ lifestyle publications.
I'm Elsie. I work at Rideback. I run the TV Incubator there. For me, as a Asian woman working in the industry, for me it's important to have that and make sure that's reflected and the people that are working both in front of the camera and behind the camera, and just looking for more of that inclusivity around me, and pushing that dialogue with, I would say, Caucasian executives who perhaps don't embrace that in their own work.
My name is Susan, and I'm an executive at Starz in original programming. And why I do what I do is to make sure that everybody is able to see themselves reflected. I think it is important. Everybody needs to see themselves in the stories and to know that stories are about them. That's what makes us human.
Hi, everyone. I'm Damien Navarro, the new executive director of OUTFEST. And having been a biracial, gay, Latino in a couple of different industries that I didn't typically see myself reflected, it has been so exciting as I've taken on this role to hear how much not only our organizations, but many of the companies and organizations that you see up on the panel are desperately looking for new ways in order to drive stronger inclusivity in all aspects of our businesses.
I have the great pleasure of working for a gentleman named Common. And as a black woman, I spent my entire career making movies about and with people of color. And I spent my whole life as a kid. I had a quite peripatetic childhood. I lived all over North Africa, Africa, the Middle East, like you name it. And I was always looking for people who looked like me. But because I had that childhood experience, I grew up a bookworm. I grew up immersed in stories and love them. And so that's what I'm always looking for, is that experience of connecting, of belonging, of being included, and not what sadly we have most of in our media and a lot of other areas, especially in America, where we this whole tapestry of beautiful people in front of me are not equally represented, and that's what we're working to change.
Hi, I'm Swati, and for me, I think, I'm usually the only foreigner in the room here. I just moved to the US about a little over 3 years ago. And I'm very grateful that, many people here have taken a bet on me and have given me that chance. So I am hoping to be able to do that for others. Growing up, it was different. I came from a very traditional upbringing, and even though I was a dreamer, I think I built fences around my dreams. And it was only when films happened to me that I think I experienced freedom. And for me, I really feel very, very grateful to be in this world, to get paid for making films and TV. I really want to be able to do that for others, the same that, people have done for me.
Hi, my name is David Radcliff. I'm a member of the Writers with Disabilities Committee at the Writers Guild, and also was a writer on The Rookie and on a Netflix show that I'm not allowed to talk about. I have cerebral palsy, and very often people come up to me and ask me about my disability, which I used to find frustrating, and now as a storyteller I find that kind of exciting because it allows them to open up to me. And I remember I used to have this little TV guide description of what cerebral palsy was so that I could explain it to strangers. And then I was standing in a Subway sandwich shop on my crutches, and somebody came over to me and said, "What happened to your legs?" And I said, "Do you watch Breaking Bad?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "I have what Walt Jr. has." And he said, "Cool," and walked away. And I thought, this saves us a lot of time. So I work with the committee and in as many spaces as I can to expand conversations about diversity to include those of us with disabilities of all types. They said, "Do you want to be on an intersectional panel?" And I thought, well, I'm a boring straight white guy from Nebraska, but sadly there are very few writers with disabilities of color working, and that's something that I think needs to change. The marginalization that happens to folks transcends all different categories, so I'm excited to be here.
So I'd love to hear of any encouraging sort of success stories as we all sort of strive to figure out ways to drive change.
I know there was a recent event that we did at OUTFEST in which we had presented probably a little bit more vanilla shorts than we typically do at a lot of our screenings, and we did it at Grand Park. And I think something magical happens when you get various types of backgrounds, whether that's gender identity, sexuality, as well as various persons of colors, to come together and experience something in a public way. And there's an incredible amount of empathy that I see that builds every time that we are able to pull off something that attracts such a great diversity of observers. And in many cases, it's those happy accidents that people stumble upon, giving others an opportunity to express themselves in a safe environment and inviting the public to be a part of that. And so for us at OUTFEST, it's so incredible to be able to create these unique spaces in which those that potentially wouldn't have found this content, whether it's because an algorithm no longer rewards your behavior for creating a more diverse experience in your observational habits of content. And I've noticed this in corporations and companies as well, having been a former executive of for-profit companies. It is when you take that extra time in a less meaningful way, and when I say less meaningful, it means simply just bringing people together, and it may be as something as simple as what we saw when we were kids, where it's a potluck idea, and that could be scaled to so many different ways of everybody bringing and sharing a unique part of themselves, again, in a safe space. So those are just some of the ways that I've seen this very kind of public way of bringing those people together.
So at Rideback, I run the TV Incubator, and we've selected 8 creators from all types of backgrounds. We have opened up to everybody because it's an inclusive creator program. So that could mean having the Caucasian guy, the person of color, LGBTQI, socioeconomic background, age. We have 4 military veterans, actually, that we selected. For us, what we really are looking for is life experience. That's what we are trying to tap into, because we believe that those creators with those stories are worth investing in. And so we pay them $150,000 for this 8-month program to write their own pilot and also to be able to pitch their project to buyers. Again, with the safe space, the whole goal is to create that safe space for them so that each person is paired with a high-level EP or showrunner. We have Charles Murray from Luke Cage and Sons of Anarchy, Glenn Mazzara from The Walking Dead, Amy Berg, who did Counterpart on Starz. We have a whole host of them, and each creator is paired with that mentor producer so that they can guide them through that development process and creating their own show.
We just sort of engage in diversity by doing diversity, right? So if you look at all of the projects that we're involved in, whether that's television, I see a director-writer that I've worked with a couple of times back there who we're doing a feature documentary with. Everything we do, and that doesn't mean it can't be fun and entertaining, but everything we do is all about inclusion and diversity. And, so we're doing what we call a queer John Hughes with a young woman at its core. We've got a series of books about a Korean American millennial written by a Korean American millennial. We've got Zora Neale Hurston's book, Barracoon. We have that's just, if you look at all the projects we're involved with, they all have diverse either creators, cast, stories. It's all about what I learned from my friend Jacqueline, intersectionality. It's my favorite new word. First time when she called me to say this, I was like, what are you talking about? But I looked it up and I learned that that's what we were doing without having a name for it at the company. So that's honestly, we just do it. It doesn't mean that it always works, but there are executives who see us regularly with projects, and they know what we're coming with, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we're not daunted by that. We're just going to keep doing it, because sooner or later they give in. They see you enough. And that's just what you have to keep doing. You have to hammer on those doors, because not every buyer is dedicated to showcasing other voices. They tend to look at things almost not like widgets, but they're looking for their this, that, or the other thing, as opposed to saying, you know what, we have to reach out into areas perhaps we're not as familiar with.
As a buyer who works at a network that happens to be very successful with appealing to a diverse audience. So our biggest show is Power, which is a ginormous show among Black audiences, but also just general audiences. And as a network, we have made and I'm not trying to get you to buy Starz or anything, but we definitely have made a commitment to programming that will support the Power audience and that will keep the Power audience subscribing. So there is a bit of green right? Like, we have a big show that appeals to that audience. We want to keep those people coming back, so we want to find more shows that will appeal to that audience. And they've spent money. They hired multiple executives of color to help source the material, and they've been pretty open about the things that we bring in. We can't buy everything, obviously, but they've definitely made a financial commitment and then backed it up with the people in the room. It is interesting. I've definitely met with all writers who are surprised that there are, if not one, sometimes multiple Black executives in one room who have this kind of, at least we have the ability to, if not buy at that moment, we're in the room where we can help push it forward. So it is interesting. I mean, we've made this commitment not only on the Power audience, but on Latinx, LGBTQ. Like, this is what we're doing, and they see value in it. So that's an interesting sort of...
And I have to say, I really do applaud Starz, because on the programming side, I think as a producer, that's the most frustrating part, because the stories are there. There are lots of voices, lots of creators that have fantastic projects, but it's a choice for the programmers to invest in them and greenlight them and say, we see so much value in you guys, or we see potential and we're going to back you. So I really applaud what you guys are doing there, because not everybody is doing that. And so that's why I will say, I had a very frustrating week, and I still feel like I'm recuperating because of some of the very frustrating conversations that we can have with those financiers and buyers.
When I finished film school, the advice that I was given, and which was given to a lot of my classmates, was if you want to work in television, you've got to be an assistant first. So I went out for several different assistant jobs, both on my crutches or in my wheelchair, and was told over a dozen times that they were going in another direction. Preferably, I assume, someone that could run and get coffee or pick up lunches. And the ABC Disney program picked me up last year when I made a case for folks with disabilities and explained that these assistant jobs and a lot of the traditional funnels, for a lot of different reasons, aren't available to us. And I pitched an episode of Speechless, because I know how this room sees me when I come in the door, so I'm just going to lean right into it. And now that I'm on the other side of the door and realizing all the challenges and the fact that there are still single digits of writers with disabilities in TV, I'm trying to figure out how to help other folks in this category get through the doors that literally don't have ramps in front of them. So I am here in part to ask for the advice of the audience at the end in sort of finding my way through some of these channels, because a lot of this is very new to me. So I hope to be picking the brains of a lot of the folks on the panel as well.
At Imagine, I don't know how many of you know this, but there's a program called the Imagine Impact Program, which is basically an incubator for writers. It offers, so what the program does is it invites people to send in their scripts, initial drafts, and then they select about 20 writers, and then they come in. They spend about, and these are writers from around the world. They've had about 3 impacts so far, and yes, the majority of them have been Americans, but they have had people from Africa, India, I think China, and also Latin America. So, these are stories that are not really just the immigrant population in America that represents geography, but real geography. And so it's interesting to find these stories, and it's a great platform for writers from anywhere in the world, because you have 8 weeks where a shaper is assigned to you, and within those 8 weeks, you have a ready script to be able to pitch to anybody, anywhere. And then the shaper mentors you through the process as well, which I think is amazing. In the business that we've set up, which is still a startup of sorts, it's barely been about 4 or 5 months now. What we do is, essentially, we would be doing local language content as well, but what is it that we're going to do that the local producer would not do on his own? So we would identify things where we could potentially bring value from just being here in LA and having access to screenwriting that sometimes local markets don't have, like screenplay for TV is not necessarily well developed in most markets. And then what we're looking to do is global content in the true sense, which is intersecting worlds and characters. So let's say intercontinental love stories or biographies on true global personalities who don't necessarily come only from America, even the bad guys. So things like that. So I feel like these are all steps going in the right direction.
There's been a lot of conversation, certainly over the last couple of years, about having more female critics, more critics of color. And so how do you approach that specifically at Out Magazine?
I mean, I think in general, we see that there is a conversation happening about access for journalists of diverse background, for critics, but I'm not sure that conversation is resulting in action. And I think part of that is still because while there are a lot of great initiatives and programs to bring more diverse stories to the screen, a lot of those people aren't getting the support necessary, right? And so they'll be welcomed into the room, but they won't be, the show won't get picked up for a second season, or they won't be given the necessary marketing budget, right, to get it in front of the people that it needs to get in front of. And so when it comes to the journalist side of things, it's difficult for us to make the conversation about why you need more diverse people writing about these stories when the industry as a whole still don't really care about folks of color, in my opinion, from my perspective, right? I think what we see is that there seems to be some interest in some of our stories because they see that, Black people will show up for a power, or, when Empire was the thing, Black people will show up for an empire, and so everybody tries to get their empire. But when in reality, we need a variety of different Black stories, a variety of different queer stories, a variety of different disabled stories. But what we see is everybody wants to recreate that one thing that worked for that one network. And so you don't really see kind of the access, I think, spreading to all of the communities in the ways that we think it is. It's great to have us at the table in some of these conversations and bringing us into some of the rooms, but if we're not the ones in control, if we're not the ones who have the green light power, if not the ones who have the buying power, there's only but so far we can go. I know I started talking about things that aren't journalism related, but that's what I do. And so I think there's a lot of conversations happening about diversity and inclusion and all of that good stuff, but I'm interested in actual shifts happening. And right now it's just, somebody moved the cup from over here to over there.
I think it's important for people above the line, like the producers, the directors, the talent, on-air, talent, the actors and actresses, where they have to demand that you're at the junkets, that you are reviewing, that you are seeing, you get access to the shows so you can review them,
Unfortunately, it's not happening. And I think even some of these great people that y'all see in the news who, might be some of the more vocal people about inclusion on the critic side of things, all they can do is tell their team to do it, but their team don't look like this panel, right? And so, to be quite honest, you got a lot of white women who are, you know, the publicists and the managers, white men and managers and all of that at the studios, inside the studios, also on their personal teams, who just don't see a worth in an Out magazine or a Shade Room or a Hello Beautiful or the Grapevine or, you know, a Vibe or an Essence. They just don't think that audience is necessary. And so you see it in terms of how, you know, the outlets that they talk to on the red carpets, right? Even your biggest black stars who needed those black publications to get them where they're at won't talk to the black publication on the red carpet. And they're allowing their white publicists to tell them, oh, no, we're not gonna do Essence or Ebony, we're gonna take you to ET, we're gonna take you to Facebook Live, we're gonna take you to all of these places, when it was that black publication that first gave you a cover, but now you're forgetting it.
I agree. I will say this, because being the network person, I see the publicity and marketing departments. I hope nobody is here from that department. But those are the
Cone
places,
of silence, people.
serious, please. They don't look like us. Yeah. They don't look anything like us. And they don't talk to or know about the Shade Room or any of the magazines or publications or places that you just mentioned. And it is really limiting. And they are somewhat dismissive. And Courtney is brilliant. And if Courtney was David Simon, Courtney would be nominated for Emmys. Yeah. Okay? She would have an even bigger deal somewhere else. But because she's not, she's a black woman, she's just, it's just power. No, yeah. You know? So there's so many different layers to what you just said, and I.
So what can we do? Like, do we
have
need
to have
to
people,
have
people need to
him
not
go
just
sit with the head of publicity at Starz?
And also people need to not just want to be in like the glamorous side of the business. Like, people have to go into marketing. People have to go into publicity, the corporate side, because otherwise it's just going to stay the way it is. I mean, my original programming floor has color, but trust me, everyone in the C-suite offices, there's no color.
You are exactly right. You know, there's a couple terrifying things that are happening in the industry, at least I've seen from being on the theatrical marketing side and having an agency that had to essentially find audiences for both television and film properties, and how scary it is when you do have that room of, let's just say, cisgen straight white men who are hiding behind the data or what the algorithm or what the AI is saying. And that's their own way of obviously discriminating against really finding either a project being greenlit or it finding its true audience. You know, I've been using this word, the collective emerging majority, instead of letting them peg us as a minority audience. Because once we allow ourselves to be seen as a subsection of a subsection, it all starts to fall apart when you think about audience and viewing behavior and buying behavior. And at OUTFEST, to your point earlier, how do we start to change that shift? We're not just looking at the visibility of film or television or being seen as an influencer way into gathering a group or sentiment around a specific property. For us, we have to change the very fabric of the number of opportunities we have into the industry as a whole. And so what we're really looking at is, you know, we have a trans acting workshop. We have Outset, which is, of course, our 16 to 24-year-old young filmmaker program that we have with the center. But more importantly, we're looking at below-the-line opportunities. To David's point earlier, if you're not an able-bodied, you know, traditional PA, you're really kind of stuck of how you enter the industry. So we are looking at financial software training, or going through business and legal affairs, or theatrical marketing and promotions, because it is only when we start to saturate from all corners of the industry will we start to impact real change, when everywhere that they turn, there's one of us.
To this point, I also try to remind folks as gently as I can that disability is the only group that everybody joins eventually. So whether through age or illness or accident, it's coming for you. And I think there needs to be more exposure to us to let everybody know that it's okay. And one thing that frustrates me is in the few opportunities that you do see folks with disabilities on screen, very often the spaces that create those stories don't include disabled people, and so you end up regurgitating stories of pity or stories of bitterness and isolation, and I hope I hope that's not the image that I project, but who knows. But you know, I think all of us up here in all of our respective efforts are trying to make more inclusive spaces, and I think there needs to be an awareness of each of our individual blind spots, even as we do all this good work. Like, I'm constantly learning about all the stuff that I'm missing, because I do have a fair amount of privilege as a straight white guy. But I think that, you know, in the places that we can intersect to lift each other up, that's really important. None of this is malicious in so far as people aren't actively trying to keep folks like me out of spaces. They just haven't thought of us, and they haven't thought about the points of access that would make our careers more accessible.
One of the interesting, Damien, you brought up the data. I did want to talk a little bit about that, because I think, you know, sometimes we'll see there are many, you know, studies and reports, and it can kind of go either way. On the one hand, there are the studies and reports that will say, you know, it's really dismal, the opportunities, and that's a reality, the opportunities that are there, creators. And then there are the reports and the data that says actually audiences, and you see it from box office with certain kinds of films, certainly, whether it's a Black Panther or The Farewell, that do extraordinary well. How do we rally that data towards the positive side of it? I'd love to hear each of your thoughts on, you know, the data, the stats, and how do we perhaps utilize that to drive change?
I, for one, am a big fan of data, because I think data is very empowering, and you know, you can take better chances and better risks with good amount of data. That said, that shouldn't really limit your intuition, because I feel like data should empower your intuition, should fine-tune your intuition, and you should be able to take those risks. So the risk you take is more informed when you, so you know, many times, so I've had an opportunity to work at Netflix, which is a very data-driven company. I hope I'm not going to be saying anything confidential here, but the thing is that, you know, when we started International Originals about 4 years ago, we had no data, you know, from international markets. So you were really taking bets. But it's about conversation, it's about pushing the envelope with people, it's about creating your own data from, you know, whatever you have. The inferences that you make from the data that's available, and your communication in terms of how you really pitch a particular thing or a particular market or a particular project to someone when you don't have data. So I think it's about pushing it with people, not giving up, and continuing to have that conversation, but not ignoring that data, because that data, even if, you know, if she says this data looks good and I can do that, well, you know, the other person can say no, but because of that same number, you cannot do that. So it's all about inferences and perception. So I think data is definitely very, very enabling.
When you go into, I would say 90% of the buying offices, whether that's film or television or any other form of media exploitation, they are not diverse places by and large. And the people who make those decisions, I loved what you said, because the people who make those decisions have not changed in the 30 years I've been doing this. They still are the same, so in some cases, the same people in different jobs, right? They just go like this. But those ranks have not shifted. That's just the truth. Everyone, I feel like what's happened lately is like there's been this co-opting of the conversation in terms of content, which is great, but it is also selected kind of content, right? And okay, love it or hate it, I know people have varying opinions, but something like Pose, which came out of Ryan Murphy's creative arm, you know, could not have existed had he not made as much money as he had as a gay white man at a very white network, right? And then he pushed this envelope because he could. I don't know that if you had come in without Ryan Murphy, you would have gotten any level of that access. Because fundamentally, this is still a business, and if you don't make people enough money, they don't really roll the dice on something. If you came in with Pose, they're not going to roll the dice with you on that.
Yeah, you're right, because it absolutely took Ryan Murphy to make that show.
Absolutely, no one else.
Steven met with 150 executives.
Exactly.
Like 150 people
Said no.
sat down with, yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And
So-
had he not had the success of Glee and 911 and all those shows, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that for us as sellers sometimes, and I don't know who all of you are sellers, and that includes writers, directors, actors. You are selling something to these gatekeepers, and the gatekeepers' data can be great, and data can also be incredibly damaging, because data is all about one's perception, right? How I read a set of numbers has to do with my world vision. So if there are 12 versions of Power, Power is a great show, but still exists inside a certain perception. And one of the words I hate most in our business is urban. Urban used to be the way in which black people and brown people of Latinx descent were marginalized, because it was like, oh, it's urban meant only a small slice of the audience, of the total overall audience, would show up for it. So now what's happened is the urban conversation has gotten very complicated because Black Panther, Crazy Rich Asians, Empire, Power, Pose, right? So I feel like we're still sort of stuck in this verbiage which is incorrect. And the last thing I want to say is, I read this great article this summer, I think it was Wall Street Journal, about this show called Money Heist, and how it was the biggest hit on Netflix. And I had not heard of it, so I went and I looked it up. And it is in Spanish, which then they dubbed, I don't know, whatever, La Casa de Papel. So it is a telenovela meets a Quentin Tarantino heist show. And it goes really telenovela sometimes. You're just like, I have no idea why they're stopping to have sex right now, but okay. I think there's like 150 hostages in a bank, but please, let's just have the chief of police stop right now to go have a love affair. That's awesome. But it is insanely addictive, and it has also gotten something like 50 million people around the world. So the language is not a barrier. You get to pick what language you'd like to watch the show in. The story is universal. Yes, they're all Spanish actors. I've never seen them before, but it doesn't stop me from being addicted to the show and halfway through season 3 and waiting for season 4 to come, right? And that's what I think that's where data couldn't have helped you, because it's just like this storytelling that grabs you and kind of sucks you down this rabbit hole. And that's where I love data, but you can't rely on it, because again, it's all about this, whatever the lens is that views it.
Yeah, and so from this data perspective, if I said that 1 in 5 people have disabilities, which is true, then you're probably, if you're not already exposed to that data, you think, well, where are they, right? Well, for one thing, a lot of them don't have the kind of capital that would be necessary to bring them into spaces where a lot of stuff is being created. And secondly, and so that's why I feel, like I have a social responsibility as somebody that broke through, to be like, look at all these people you're not seeing. I haven't had a car in 2 years, so I've been spending a lot of time on the metro system, and that's where a lot of disabled folks are, because they're spending 45 cents, 75 cents to get to and from, and then there's always the cost of time. So a lot of this, again, isn't malicious. It's just that we have pushed ourselves into a space where our own privilege makes certain groups invisible. And there are so many great stories to be told that just can't get told because there aren't these access points.
I feel like a lot of the data, it's important to say that, like, based on its premise, it's like racist, or it's anti-black, or it's anti-queer, anti-trans, anti-disabled, all of these things. And I say that because the way you all said it was, it's about like the person's perception and how they're looking at the data. When in reality, a lot of this data isn't as robust, it isn't talking to the people who it needs to talk to. It's talking to those of us who have, you know, if you have a landline at your house, or it's talking to the people who aren't necessarily representative of all of us here. And so it's not as useful as we like to think it is. And when the data is used in a lot of these studios, in a lot of these production companies, what ends up happening is a tokenization takes place. And it's like, we need our power, we need our empire, we need our pose. But you don't see those same creatives, a lot of them, having opportunities after that. It's great, we keep mentioning pose, and I think, you know, the point that was made about like Ryan Murphy, a white gay man who had demonstrated success in this industry, using his privilege, even as a white gay man, to bring some trans folks of color along with him, to bring Stephen Canals along with him, is like a necessary thing, but we don't see that happening a lot, right? Or we don't see, you know, what another, I hate giving white people a lot of credit, but what Ryan Murphy has done is like, you know, Stephen Canals is now a writer and a director and a producer. Janet Mock is now a writer, director, and a producer. She has a production deal at Netflix because of him using his privilege. And so all of us who have a variety of different privileges, to your point, we've got to be aware of the ways in which we can create and continue to make space for other people. But we also have to be willing, I think, to shake the table and to say, you know, when we're in some of these meetings or in some of these spaces, that why am I the only black person here, right? Like, I think we still don't have enough of us in these spaces who are able and willing to be that voice. And so a lot of us are still like faking it till we make it. Or a lot of us, you know, are just thankful that we made it, and we're not trying to mess up our coin, right? And so we're gonna let the white men do what the white men do and hope that we can slide a person of color, you know, a couple coins here on the side that they're not paying attention to, when in reality, we need those people there too. But we also need, you know, some table shakers. We also need some people to come in and be like, no, y'all are fucking this up. Why is it that the same people that you met 30 years ago in this industry are the same people in these same positions? Your favorite CEOs, your favorite presidents, your favorite chair people of these organizations, they need to leave, okay? Right? We need more people that look like us in those chairs. I can say this because I'm not really in the industry, I just write about it. But that's what we need. Like, that's what I mean when I say, like, we need a shift to happen. We need to make sure, I mean, no matter how you feel about Tyler Perry and Medea and his creations, right? But Homeboy's got a massive ass fucking studio, right? And he's giving black folks, queer folks, people of color, folks of different backgrounds the opportunity to like have a foot in this industry in ways that we don't see all of those studios that are up the street doing, right? Like we could have had a space like a Tyler Perry Studios before, right? In the decisions made in terms of who's going to lead which studio, who's going to lead which production company, they could have chose the black person or the brown person or the queer person, but they didn't, right? And part of the reasons why they didn't is because they were using data, right, to drive that decision. And so I just think we just have to think differently about what inclusion and diversity and all of this looks like, because if we continue thinking about it in the same way, what we're going to continue getting is the tokenization that's happening.
Because it's a kind of conversation that has so many different layers and angles to it, and it's so complex. There's no one easy answer. There's, you know, the things that we can do personally. It's not, we don't want to abandon labs and workshops. We want to expand labs and workshops and opportunities. And the next question, I think the next challenge is, that I think is really kind of fundamentally important, is how do we then pull those resources together to expand, to really expand those resources. And you're all examples of people who've, you know, risen through the ranks up into production companies, have decision-making power. How do we get more individuals? What are your thoughts, ideas into, certainly the creative aspect is there, but into executive ranks, into those areas of marketing, publicity, into the audience building areas? I think that is really important.
It is on us to educate them, but I would like to see labs and programs for executives, not just focused on the creator side. Those are important, but that's really where we need it. I've been talking to a couple friends about getting the CEOs of these media companies to set a fund aside, actual money aside, where they would pick 2 executives to go through like leadership training, and I'm not, I'm looking for those who are going to send up the ranks, not too high, but the ones who they believe they can keep pushing up the corporate ladder, who will eventually run, that channel or whatever it may be.
Whenever I have an opportunity to speak in front of young people, I use this language about like, don't just look in the glam side, look at the publicity, look at marketing, look at all the other areas, and hopefully that will also, the more we talk about it, the more people will understand, like those are really, really the parts of the, like at my network that drive everything. If you don't have those departments on your side, your show's never gonna be seen. It will not be seen. They will make sure that it's not seen. I can see it happening now with shows that I'm working on. So, and it's because there's a disconnect often, right, between what we're making and what they're going out there and selling. So we have to be in those spaces. We can't just be writers. As much as I want everybody to be a writer.
I think for me, it's really encouraging senior leadership to work much more closely aligned with their HR teams, their hiring managers, and not always just looking at resumes that come through, but perhaps those that might have been left off. And if you can kind of create a new paradigm for the types of profiles that you're looking for, not necessarily just because they might have certain qualifications or went through a specific school or have done this type of work, but also looking much deeper into the kind of the persona and the cultural fit is something that I feel people gloss over when we're looking at lower level team and colleague profiles that we're looking to hire on. And so I think if you can create an environment in which everybody has a say sometimes in how those teams are built out, instead of just an executive making final decisions, you might see something different emerge. And then I think you were talking about this opportunity for executives to receive a different type of level of training that could be required. My husband's a doctor and teaches medical students at UCLA. And one of the most critical things before a doctor is able to lay a hand on a patient or give advice is they have to go through a strong curriculum of role playing with people from all types of the community. Some are actors, most are not. And it is for the physician to learn the nuances in ways of communication, whether it's working through microaggressions, working through cultural issues that they might see working in a lot of these disparate communities. And why the hell do we not require executive role playing to happen when it comes to dealing with communities and people that they traditionally are not having access to? Because fear is something that leads to anger. And we all know that being afraid of having those conversations with those that you might be wanting to bring on your team, know that you should bring on your team, but there's just this block that immediately comes up because, again, you don't have these safe spaces to explore the nuances of communication and allowing for feedback, which they seem to get less and less every day, to translate and to do something differently. So I'm always trying to encourage those types of face-to-face programs in those safe spaces, again, to help people evolve.
One of the great pipelines for being able to run a studio, run production companies, whatever, move up in our business is actually working in one of the wonderful mail rooms at an agency, right? That is where networks are formed. Oh, I worked in the mailroom with him 20 years ago. That's how I know him. That's why I'm going to hire him. I worked with her, right? So, but mailrooms are tricky things because most parents of diverse, whether that's disabled or being of any color, let's say, unless you happen to come from very, very wealthy parents, you work in a mailroom, you have student debt, you might have an MBA, you might have a law degree, more debt. So now you get to come and you get to live in a city where you must have a car, you have to have car insurance, you have to afford the insane rent, and you have to work for little to no money. So for most parents of color, or diverse, this is not what they want to do after you have gone through all this schooling, is for you to come and work for damn near free for a couple of years networking, right? In a mailroom or on a desk. I've had friends who were like, oh, people actually say to me, oh, you're the diverse hire. Like, that's something wrong with you. Like, you're the charity case in this writer's room because you're the diverse hire. I don't want to do that, but I want to figure out a way to support diverse people in that pipeline because it is hard, and most people don't come from really, really wealthy, well-connected families that can afford apartments in Beverly Hills and a car and car insurance and their student loans at the same time to spend 5 years working their way up from the bottom to the middle. So that, for me, is like one of the great places where, because we lose a lot of people because they just get sick of being broke and not being able to pay their bills, and they do come in with bills that some of the other people don't come in with. And that, for me, we have to figure out some way of having a greater support system and flooding those rooms, because that's where the power base gets created, period.
When I got my opportunity to be on set, a producer came up to me and I conveyed a lot of enthusiasm, and the response was, well, this is going to be really hard for you. And I thought, I know where this is coming from. It's just because this person hasn't seen folks like me do this kind of work. So now I've got to do the work plus do the work of unraveling this pre-expectation, which I know it's in some form or another, everyone on this panel has felt that way. And so my biggest advice is to check our own biases, especially in hiring practices. There are, within the disability community, only the employment rate is 18%. So that is a huge amount of educated, willing to work people that are left out based on the biases that the prospective employer is already carrying. Through no fault of their own, they've just been watching content that shows that we are in hospitals or, sad. So we can try to change some of that content, but also change how we feel about the people that we interact with. And that would be my biggest piece of advice to folks.
But I think being aware of these things, even after this panel and on a daily basis, is very crucial. And I know it's hard when you're in a room full of people and you're different from everyone else. Maybe it's your accent, it's the way you look, it's where you come from, what you're saying to them, which is very different from the way they think. But I think it's very important to call out those implicit biases, because many times, we sort of make it a persecution complex, and it's not. It's just that the other person's not aware, and maybe you have to educate them. And they may even be stubborn and they don't want to listen to you. Find a way and keep pushing, And I know, you get called pushy and you get called a bull and you get called names, but I think the idea is to never give up and to constantly be aware and responsible for yourself and for everyone else, yeah.
One thing that I often say when I have conversations about having these conversations in newsrooms is that, you don't have to be the educator. You can just be the person of color in the room doing their job. And you don't also have to do the work. You could pay somebody like me to do it for you. And I only say that because I think sometimes, we're all just lucky sometimes to get into the space, and then we feel obligated to do the work and do all this other activism or advocacy work as well, when sometimes, goddamn, I just gave my all to get here. Now I gotta find something else to get somebody else here too. It can be a lot. And so I just give that disclaimer, you don't have to take on that burden. I was born to take on that burden, so you can pay me to do it for you or someone else. And then last thing I just add is I think, the pipeline conversations about executives and figuring out programs for that is great. But I also just have to say a lot of these companies are ran by dudes who lucked up into the job and didn't have a pipeline. They didn't have the work experience that they make us have to get there. And so what would it look like if these studios were, you just pulled somebody the same way you pull somebody, that other white dude from USC or UCLA or NYU to run your company? What if you just pulled a black person or a trans person to run your production company? Listen, black trans people in particular have survived this world. Many of them are thriving in this world. I promise you they can do your company good. I promise you, okay? And so I just want us to begin thinking differently about that hiring conversation, about who we think qualifies to be in these roles.
Thank you. This has been a great conversation, great start of a conversation, I think. But then we need the community, which is you and everyone else, to go out there and come up with other ideas and sometimes to activate ideas. Thank you for coming. And if you're not already a member of Film Independent, I'm just going to plug us again. Please do join, because we do lots of cool stuff like this.